It was supposed to be a routine dismissal. A powerful judge, eyeing a promotion to the Supreme Court, thought he could steamroll a man based on his broken English and worn-out suit. The courtroom erupted in laughter when the judge mocked the defendant's accent, treating him like a child. But the laughter died instantly when the court interpreter arrived. She didn't translate the judge's words for the defendant. She turned to the judge, pale as a ghost, and revealed a secret that would shatter the judge's career. The man in the shabby coat wasn't a victim. He was the legal legend who wrote the very laws the judge was breaking, and he had recorded everything. The Honourable Judge Lawrence Sterling didn't sit on the bench. He lounged. At 55, with silver hair coiffed to perfection and a jawline that had graced the covers of local law magazines, Sterling was the picture of judicial authority. He was also, according to the whispers in the clerk's office, a man who had already mentally moved into his office at the state Supreme Court. The docket today in Courtroom 4B was, in Sterling's opinion, beneath him. It was a parade of petty grievances, traffic violations, zoning disputes, and minor property arguments. He checked his Rolex, a gift from the partners at his old firm, Sterling, Halloway and Associates. 10:15 a.m. He had a lunch appointment with the governor's chief of staff at noon. He needed to clear this room, and fast. "Next case," Sterling barked, not bothering to look up from his file. "Case number 4492, City versus Tobias King regarding the property dispute at 42 Oak Street," the bailiff announced, his voice bored. The heavy oak doors swung open. The air in the courtroom, stale with the smell of floor wax and nervous sweat, seemed to shift. Tobias King walked in. He was a tall black man, perhaps in his late 60s, leaning heavily on a cane made of unpolished dark wood. He wore a suit that was clearly 20 years out of style. The lapels were too wide, the fabric a dull, dusty grey. It was clean, but it screamed poverty. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, clutching a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. Judge Sterling looked down from his dais, his blue eyes narrowing. He didn't see a human being. He saw a delay. He saw 5 minutes of his life wasting away before his lunch meeting. "Mr. King," Sterling said, leaning into the microphone, "you are representing yourself?" Tobias stopped at the defense table. He didn't sit. He looked up at the judge, his eyes hidden behind thick, wire-rimmed glasses. "Yes, sir," Tobias said. His voice was deep, rumbling, but thick with an accent that was hard to place. Somewhere between West Africa and the Caribbean, heavy with consonants and a rolling cadence. "I come to speak for the building. My home." Sterling suppressed a sigh. "Great," he thought. "Another one." "The city claims your structure violates 3 separate zoning codes, Mr. King. Unsafe wiring, improper setback from the curb, and commercial usage in a residential zone. How do you plead?" Tobias blinked. He shuffled his papers, his hands trembling slightly. "Sir, the wiring it is good. I fix. The city man, he come and say, 'Guilty or not guilty, Mr. King,'" Sterling interrupted, snapping his fingers. "We don't need the life story, just the plea." "I not guilty, sir. But the law, it say in section 5. "I know what the law says," Sterling snapped, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. A few people in the gallery chuckled. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious man named Gavin Reed, smirked from his table. Reed was Sterling's protégé, a shark in a tailored suit, who knew that pleasing Judge Sterling was the fastest way to a partnership. "Sir, please." Tobias tried again, his accent thickening under the pressure. The precedent, in the case of Rivera?" He struggled with the word, pronouncing it Rivera with a hard roll. Sterling laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of amusement. "Mr. King, Are you trying to cite case law? You can barely speak the language." The courtroom tittered. It was a cruel sound. "I speak English, sir," Tobias said, his dignity quiet but present. "I speak good." "You speak good?" Sterling mocked, mimicking the cadence. "Well, that's debatable. Look, I don't have time to decipher this. I'm not going to sit here and play charades while you butcher the English language and waste the court's time." Sterling turned to the bailiff. "Do we have an interpreter available? Someone who speaks? Whatever this is?" Tobias straightened up. "No interpreter needed. I understand you." "But I don't understand you," Sterling lied. He understood perfectly. He just wanted to humiliate the man. He wanted to show the gallery, and the governor's aide who might be watching, that he ran a tight, no-nonsense ship. "Bailiff, find me an interpreter. I won't proceed until this man has someone to translate his gibberish into legal English." The wait for the interpreter took 20 minutes. 20 minutes where Judge Sterling sat back, checking his phone openly, while Tobias King stood like a statue at the defense table. The prosecutor, Gavin Reed, leaned over to his assistant. "This is going to be a slaughter. Sterling is in a mood." "The old guy looks harmless, though," the assistant whispered. "Maybe we should offer a plea." "No," Reed whispered back. "Sterling wants a show. Look at him. He's performing." Reed stood up and walked over to Tobias. "Look, Mr. King," Reed said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Just plead guilty. The judge will give you a fine. If you fight this, he's going to bury you. You don't understand how this court works." Tobias looked at the young prosecutor. Behind the thick glasses, Tobias's eyes were sharp, intelligent, but Reed was too arrogant to notice. "I understand," Tobias said softly. "Do you?" Reed scoffed and walked away. Finally, the side door opened. The court clerk, a flustered woman named Martha, hurried in. Trailing behind her was Sarah O'Connell. Sarah was one of the best interpreters in the state. She was young, sharp, and fluent in 5 languages. She usually handled high-stakes diplomatic cases or federal trafficking trials. Being called down for a zoning dispute in municipal court was odd, but when Judge Sterling summoned you, you came. "Ms. O'Connell," Sterling boomed, looking relieved. "Finally. We have a communication barrier here. The defendant seems to think he's a lawyer, but he can barely string a sentence together. I need you to translate." Sarah looked at Tobias. She adjusted her glasses. "What language does the defendant speak, Your Honor?" "I don't know." Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "African? Caribbean? Just fix it." Sarah approached the defense table. She looked at Tobias King. She saw the worn suit, the cane, the dusty shoes. She took a breath and prepared to ask him his dialect of origin. Tobias turned to her. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her. Then he tapped his finger on the battered briefcase. Tap, 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 tap. Sarah froze. It was a rhythm, a very specific, idiosyncratic rhythm. It wasn't a code. It was a nervous tick she hadn't heard in 5 years. She looked closer at the man's face. The grey beard disguised his jawline, and the glasses obscured his eyes. But she looked at his hands. On his right pinky finger, there was a ring. It wasn't gold. It was a simple iron band, the kind worn by engineers in Canada or graduates of the Oxford Legal Honours Society. Tobias looked at her and gave a barely perceptible wink. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She looked from the defendant to the judge, then back to the defendant. She recognized him. It wasn't possible, but it was him. "Ms. O'Connell," Sterling barked. "Are we waiting for a written invitation? Ask him how he pleads." Sarah turned to the judge. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't shaking from fear of the defendant. She was shaking from the sheer, terrifying realization of who Judge Sterling had just insulted. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't believe an interpreter is necessary." Sterling's face turned red. "Excuse me. I decide what is necessary in my courtroom. I cannot understand the man." "Translate." "Your Honor," Sarah insisted, stepping back from Tobias as if he were a loaded weapon. "You don't understand. This man, his English is perfect." "Then why does he sound like he just got off a boat?" Sterling sneered. "Stop wasting my time, O'Connell, or I'll hold you in contempt alongside him." Tobias cleared his throat. It was a loud, commanding sound that cut through the noise of the room. He placed his hands on the table. He stood up straighter. The cane fell to the floor with a clatter, but he didn't reach for it. He didn't need it. The stoop in his shoulders vanished. The shuffling old man disappeared. In his place stood a figure of immense, imposing posture. Tobias took off the thick, wire-rimmed glasses and placed them gently on the defense table. He looked up at Judge Sterling with eyes that were cold, hard, and terrifyingly lucid. "Ms. O'Connell is correct, Lawrence," Tobias said. The accent was gone. Completely gone. His voice was a rich, polished baritone, clipped with the transatlantic precision of someone who had spent decades in the finest lecture halls of London and Harvard. It was a voice that commanded absolute silence. "I believe," Tobias continued, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone, "that the gibberish I was citing was State versus Henderson, a precedent regarding grandfathered zoning clauses. A precedent, I might add, that you seem to have conveniently forgotten in your rush to get to your lunch appointment." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Judge Sterling's mouth hung open. Who are you?" Tobias smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just trapped its prey. "My name is Tobias King, but you might know me better by the name on the textbooks you were supposed to read in law school. I am the senior partner at King, Vance and Rothschild." A gasp went through the room. King, Vance and Rothschild. It wasn't just a law firm, it was the firm. They handled international disputes, represented Fortune 500 companies, and defended heads of state. Tobias King was a myth in the legal world, a man who had argued before The Hague, a man who had been knighted by the Queen, and a man who was rumored to be advising the president on judicial appointments. And Judge Lawrence Sterling had just laughed at his accent. Sterling's face went from red to a sickly shade of white. He gripped his gavel. Mr. King, I had no idea. This is highly irregular. Why the disguise? Why the accent?" "The accent is my father's," Tobias said coldly. "He was a cleaner in this courthouse 40 years ago. He spoke just like that. And judges like you treated him just like that. Like he was stupid. Like he was slow. Like he didn't matter." Tobias walked out from behind the defense table. He didn't ask for permission. He owned the floor now. "I am currently conducting a review for the Judicial Oversight Committee," Tobias announced. "We have received complaints, Lawrence. Complaints that you are dismissive, biased, and prone to rushing due process for personal convenience. I decided to see for myself." Sterling stood up, panic rising in his chest. "This is entrapment. You can't come into my courtroom under false pretenses." "I broke no law," Tobias countered smoothly. "I am Tobias King. I am the owner of the property at 42 Oak Street, and I am a citizen of this country. Is it a crime to speak with an accent, Judge? Is it a crime to dress in old clothes?" Tobias turned to the court reporter. "I trust the record is accurate. You captured the part where the judge referred to my speech as gibberish, and where he refused to hear my motion based purely on my presentation?" The court reporter, wide-eyed, nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Every word." "Good." Tobias turned back to Sterling. "Because I intend to play that recording for the governor during your confirmation hearing next week." Sterling slumped back into his chair. He looked at Gavin Reed, his prosecutor, for help. Reed was staring at his desk, refusing to make eye contact, distancing himself from the sinking ship. "Now," Tobias said, checking his own watch, a sleek, platinum Patek Philippe that he revealed from under his frayed cuff. "Regarding case 4492, the property at 42 Oak Street, the city claims the wiring is unsafe. I have here the inspection report from the city engineer, dated yesterday, certifying it as compliant." The prosecutor, he gestured to Reed without looking at him, failed to include this in the discovery file, which is a Brady violation. Grounds for immediate dismissal and potential disbarment for Mr. Reed. Reed's head snapped up. "Your Honor, I didn't know." "Silence!" Tobias roared. The power of his voice shook the windows. "I am not speaking to you, boy. I am speaking to the judge." Tobias leaned forward, resting his hands on the railing of the gallery. "Lawrence, you have two choices. Choice A, we continue this trial. I will represent myself. I will tear apart every single ruling you have made in the last 5 years. I will call witnesses. I will make this trial last 3 weeks, and I will ensure the media is here for every second of it." "And choice B?" Sterling whispered, his voice hoarse. "Choice B," Tobias said. "You recuse yourself from this case immediately. You apologize to the court, and then you sit there and listen while I explain exactly why you are unfit to wear that robe." Sterling looked at the door. He looked at the gallery. People were already pulling out their phones. The real private name of the legal world, Tobias King, was trending locally within seconds. I recuse myself," Sterling stammered. "Bailiff, transfer this case to Judge Henderson." "Not yet," Tobias said. "The apology." Sterling grit his teeth. His pride was a physical weight in his throat. But he thought of the Supreme Court seat. If he could just diffuse this, maybe he could survive. Maybe he could spin it. "I apologize for any misunderstanding regarding the defendant's dialect," Sterling muttered. "Not to me," Tobias said sharply. "To the room. To every person you have rushed, mocked, or ignored because they didn't look like you or sound like you. Apologize to the sanctity of the law, Lawrence, because you have insulted it." Sterling looked out at the gallery. He saw the faces of the people he had dismissed earlier. "I apologize," Sterling said, barely audible. "Louder," Tobias commanded. "I apologize," Sterling shouted, his composure shattering. Tobias nodded. He turned to Sarah O'Connell, the interpreter. "Thank you, Miss O'Connell. Your services are, as always, impeccable. You may bill my firm for the day." "Thank you, Mr. King," Sarah whispered. Tobias picked up his battered briefcase. He didn't pick up the cane. He walked toward the exit, his stride strong and confident. "Mr. King," Sterling called out, desperation in his voice. Is that it? The review?" Tobias stopped at the doors. He didn't turn around. "The review is finished, Lawrence. You'll be hearing from the committee." The door to Judge Sterling's chambers slammed shut, but it couldn't block out the hum of chaos rising from the hallway. Sterling leaned against the heavy mahogany wood, his chest heaving. He felt like he had just run a marathon in a suit of armor. His hands, usually so steady when signing sentencing orders, were shaking violently. He went to his sidebar and poured a glass of scotch. It was 11 Sayuted a.m. He didn't care. "It's fine," he whispered to himself, the amber liquid burning his throat. "It's a stunt. King is an old man. He's grandstanding. I can fix this. He reached for his phone to call the governor's chief of staff, a man named Preston Hayes. They were supposed to have lunch in an hour at the Capitol Grill. A few laughs, a handshake, and Sterling's nomination to the Supreme Court would be all but guaranteed. He dialed. It rang once, twice. Then, voicemail. "Preston, it's Lawrence," Sterling said, trying to keep his voice level. "Listen, there was a bit of a situation in court today. Some performance art by a disgruntled lawyer. You might hear about it. Just nonsense. I'm handling it. Still on for lunch?" He hung up. He took another drink. Then his phone chimed, a notification. Then another. Then a flood. It started with a text from his wife, Catherine. "Lawrence, why is my sister calling me, asking if you're a racist? What did you do?" Sterling's stomach dropped. He opened Twitter, X. He didn't have an account, but he searched his own name. It was already trending. The judge who laughed. A video clip, shaky and filmed from the back of the gallery, had been uploaded 10 minutes ago. It showed Sterling mocking Tobias King. It showed him laughing at the accent. It showed the cruel, dismissive wave of his hand. And then it showed the transformation, the moment Tobias King dropped the act and spoke with the voice of God. The caption read, "Judge Sterling tries to bully a poor immigrant, accidentally bullies the most powerful lawyer in the country. Watch the blood drain from his face. It had 500,000 views, and the counter was spinning like a slot machine." The door to his chambers opened. Gavin Reed, the prosecutor, walked in. Reed looked pale, sweaty, and terrified. He was holding a box of his personal belongings. "What are you doing?" Sterling snapped. "Get back in there and fix the docket. We have cases." "I'm leaving, Judge," Reed said, his voice cracking. "I just resigned." "Resigned? Are you mad? You're on the partner track." "There is no track," Reed shouted, losing his composure. "Do you know who Tobias King is? He's not just a lawyer, Lawrence. He's the chairman of the ethics board for the Bar Association. He literally decides who gets to keep their license. If I stay attached to you, I'll never practice law again." "Attached to me?" Sterling stepped forward, his face twisting in anger. "You were laughing right along with me, Gavin. You were smirking. You're just as guilty." Reed looked at him with cold, survivalist eyes. "I just gave a statement to the press outside. I told them I was uncomfortable with your conduct for months. I told them I tried to object, but you overruled me in chambers. I'm turning state's witness against you, Lawrence. It's my word against yours." "You little snake," Sterling hissed. "I made you." "And now you've unmade us both," Reed said. He walked out, leaving the door open. Through the open door, Sterling could hear the sound of the press pack gathering in the lobby. He checked his phone again. A text message from Preston Hayes, the governor's chief of staff. "Lunch is cancelled. The governor has rescinded your nomination. Do not contact this office again." Sterling dropped the phone. It hit the expensive Persian rug with a dull thud. The Scotch glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. He wasn't just losing a promotion, he was being erased. But the worst was yet to come. Tobias King hadn't just come to embarrass him, he had come to dismantle him. Down in the lobby, Tobias King stood before a wall of microphones. He had changed. He was no longer in the dusty grey suit. His assistant had brought him a fresh change of clothes, a bespoke Navy Italian suit that cost more than Sterling's car. He looked regal. "Mr. King! Mr. King!" a reporter from Channel 5 shouted. "Was this a premeditated sting operation?" Tobias raised a hand. Silence fell instantly. "It was a stress test," Tobias said, his voice smooth and carrying perfectly for the cameras. "We engineer bridges to withstand hurricanes. We must engineer our courts to withstand prejudice. Today, Courtroom 4B collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. "What happens to Judge Sterling now?" another reporter asked. Tobias looked directly into the camera lens. He knew Sterling was watching upstairs. "Incompetence is a firing offence," Tobias said darkly. "But corruption, that is a prison offence. And my firm has spent the last 6 months looking into Judge Sterling's finances. What we found regarding the zoning permits in this district will not just end his career. It will end his freedom." Up in his chamber, Sterling stared at the TV screen. His knees gave way, and he sank into his leather chair. "They know," he thought. "Dear God, they know about the developer." 3 days later, the fall was complete. Judge Sterling sat in his living room. The curtains were drawn, the house was dark. Catherine had left him the morning after the video went viral, taking the kids to her mother's estate in Connecticut. She didn't want to be around when the police arrived. And they were coming. The hard karma that Tobias King had promised wasn't some vague, cosmic justice. It was a forensic audit. It turned out that Tobias King's interest in 42 Oak Street wasn't random. The property was a historic boarding house that had served the local black community for 50 years. It was a sanctuary for people who had nowhere else to go. But a luxury development company, Vanguard Estates, wanted the land. They wanted to build high-end condos. The only thing standing in their way was the zoning laws. Judge Sterling had been quietly ruling against every property owner on that block for 2 years, citing safety violations that didn't exist, forcing owners to sell cheap to Vanguard Estates. In exchange, Vanguard had paid off Sterling's massive gambling debts in Las Vegas through a shell company. It was a perfect scheme, until he tried to bulldoze Tobias King's family heritage. A loud banging on the front door made Sterling jump. "Lawrence Sterling, police! Open up!" He didn't move. He just stared at the wall. He thought about the man in the shabby suit. He thought about how easy it would have been to just listen, to just look at the evidence, to treat the man with basic human dignity. The door was kicked in. Uniformed officers swarmed the hallway. Handcuffs were slapped onto his wrists, wrists that had only ever known the weight of a gavel, now feeling the cold steel of the state. They marched him out of his front door. The press was there, of course. Tobias King had ensured the timing was public. Sterling was shoved into the back of a squad car. As the car pulled away, he saw a black Bentley parked across the street. The window rolled down. Tobias King sat in the back seat. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He looked sad. Tobias nodded once at the disgraced judge, then rolled the window up. 2 weeks later, the courtroom scene was reversed. Lawrence Sterling sat at the defense table. He wore an orange jumpsuit. He looked 10 years older. His silver hair was messy, his jawline covered in grey stubble. The courtroom was packed. But this time, the gallery wasn't laughing. They were angry. The community he had sold out had shown up in force. The prosecutor was a woman named District Attorney Reynolds, a fierce, no-nonsense litigator who had taken the case personally. But she had a special co-counsel for the sentencing phase. Tobias King walked in. He was officially representing the victims of the Vanguard Estates fraud, filing a victim impact statement before sentencing. Tobias stood at the podium. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Sterling. "Your Honor," Tobias addressed the new judge, Judge Harrison. "We do not seek vengeance. Vengeance is a petty thing, fit for small men. We seek restoration." Tobias turned to face Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Tobias said, using the title Mr. like a weapon, stripping him of his judicial honorific. "You asked me, on the day we met, why I cared so much about a rundown house at 42 Oak Street. You thought it was an investment. You thought I was like you, driven by greed. Sterling stared at the table, refusing to look up. That house, Tobias continued, his voice thick with emotion, was where my father lived when he first came to this country. He was a janitor. He cleaned floors so I could read books. He didn't have a voice in this city. People laughed at his accent. People dismissed him. But in that house, he was a king. He was a man. Tobias pulled a photo from his file. He held it up. It was a black and white photo of a smiling man in a janitor's uniform, holding a young boy's hand. You tried to destroy his legacy for a paycheck, Tobias said quietly. You laughed at the memory of a man who was 10 times the human being you will ever be. The courtroom was silent. Tears streamed down the faces of the people in the gallery, people who remembered the elder king, people who had been evicted by Sterling's corrupt gavel. I have purchased the debt of Vanguard Estates, Tobias announced, dropping a bombshell. The company has been dissolved as of this morning. The land at 42 Oak Street and the surrounding block has been placed in a trust. He turned to the gallery. It will not be condos, Tobias declared. It will be the King Legal Aid Center, a place where people who cannot afford lawyers, people who speak broken English, people who wear worn-out clothes, can come and find justice, free of charge. The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of approval. People stood up. They cheered. Sterling looked up then. He saw the joy in the room. He realized, fully and finally, what he had lost. He hadn't just lost his job. He had lost his place in humanity. He was the villain in a story of heroes. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, but he let the cheering go on for a long moment before restoring order. Lawrence Sterling, Judge Harrison said, his voice cold. You have disgraced this bench. You have betrayed the public trust. For the crimes of racketeering, fraud, and judicial misconduct, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison. The gavel slammed down. It sounded like a gunshot. Sterling was hauled to his feet. As the bailiffs dragged him away, he looked back one last time. Tobias King was surrounded by people. He was shaking hands. He was smiling. He was listening to an old woman who was speaking rapidly in Spanish, and he was answering her in fluent Spanish, nodding with deep respect. Sterling realized then that the accent didn't matter. The clothes didn't matter. It was the man inside that counted. And Lawrence Sterling was empty. While Judge Lawrence Sterling sat in a holding cell, trading his tailored suit for institutional orange, the shockwaves of his downfall were still shattering the lives of those who had stood in his shadow. Gavin Reed, the young prosecutor, who had once smirked at Tobias King's broken English, sat in the waiting room of King, Vance and Rothschild. The law firm was located on the top floor of the city's tallest skyscraper, a fortress of glass and steel that looked down on the courthouse like a god watching mortals. Gavin checked his watch. He had been waiting for 2 hours. He knew this was a power move. He knew Tobias King was making him sweat. And it was working. Gavin's shirt was damp, his palms slick against the leather armrest. Since the video had gone viral, Gavin had become a pariah. The district attorney's office had suspended him, pending an investigation. His phone had stopped ringing. The prestigious job offers he had been fielding just a week ago had evaporated. He was 29 years old, top of his class from Yale, and his career was over before it had truly begun. He expected Tobias King to walk in with a disbarment notice. He expected to be crushed. The heavy double doors finally swung open. Tobias King didn't walk in with the angry stride of a vengeful titan. He walked in slowly, tapping his cane against the marble floor with a rhythmic click-clack that echoed in the silence. He carried a silver tray with a porcelain coffee set. "Mr. Reed," Tobias said, his voice low and unreadable. "I apologize for the delay. I was on a call with the governor regarding the appointment of the new judge for District 4. It seems they are looking for someone who actually reads the law." Gavin swallowed hard, standing up out of respect, or perhaps fear. "Mr. King, I appreciate you seeing me." Tobias set the tray down on the massive conference table. He poured 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising in the cold air-conditioned room. He pushed one toward Gavin. "Black, 2 sugars. That is how you take it, correct?" Gavin froze, his hand hovering over the cup. How do you know that?" Tobias sat down, folding his hands over the handle of his cane. "I am a lawyer, Mr. Reed. A good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows people. I know you take your coffee black with 2 sugars. I know you graduated with honors but carry $200,000 in student loan debt. And I know that your mother, Martha, is currently in the St. Jude Care Facility, battling early-onset dementia, and that her care costs $6,000 a month." Gavin's legs gave out, and he sank back into his chair. He felt stripped bare. "Are you going to use that against me? Are you going to sue me for everything I don't have?" "I am trying to understand you, Gavin," Tobias said, his eyes sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "I watched the full security tape from that day, not just the part the public saw. I saw you whisper to your assistant. You wanted to offer a plea deal. You knew Sterling was wrong. You knew he was violating my rights. Yet you stood there. You laughed when he laughed. You mocked me when he mocked me. Why?" Gavin looked down at the dark liquid in his cup. The shame burned hotter than the coffee. "Because I was afraid," Gavin whispered, his voice cracking. "Sterling was powerful. If I crossed him, he could ruin me. And I need the job. I need the money for my mum. I thought, if I just played the game, if I just kept my head down and made partner, I could eventually do some good. I thought I had to survive first, to make a difference later." "Survival is a poor excuse for cruelty," Tobias said sternly. "My father cleaned toilets in this city for 40 years to survive. He was invisible to men like you, but he never once compromised his dignity. He never once stepped on another man to make himself taller." Tobias reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy file. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped inches from Gavin's hand. "This is the file for the King Legal Aid Center," Tobias said. "It is a project I have been funding privately. It is located at 42 Oak Street, the very building you tried to help Sterling condemn." Gavin looked at the file, confused. "I don't understand." "I am looking for a director," Tobias stated flatly. "The center will provide free legal defense for the indigent, the immigrants, the people who speak with accents and wear second-hand clothes, the people you and Sterling considered garbage." Gavin looked up, his eyes wide. You're offering me a job?" "I am offering you a penance," Tobias corrected him, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The salary is exactly enough to cover your student loan payments and your mother's care facility. Not a penny more. You will not buy Italian suits. You will not drive a luxury car. You will work 14-hour days. You will lose cases because the system is stacked against the poor. You will be tired. You will be frustrated. And you will be humbled." Tobias leaned forward, his gaze piercing Gavin's soul. "You have a brilliant legal mind, Gavin. But your heart is atrophied. You have forgotten what the law is for. It is not a sword for the strong. It is a shield for the weak." Gavin reached out and touched the file. The texture of the paper felt real. It felt heavy. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Why me?" Gavin asked, tears stinging his eyes. "I stood there and let him humiliate you." "Because you hesitated," Tobias said softly. "In the video, for 1 second, you looked at me with shame. Sterling never felt shame. You did. And where there is shame, there is the capacity for redemption." Tobias stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "Report to 42 Oak Street tomorrow at 7 a.m. The contractors are still finishing the roof, so bring a hard hat. And Gavin?" Gavin stood up, clutching the file to his chest. "Yes, sir?" Tobias offered a small, grim smile. "Leave the tie at home. It intimidates the clients." Gavin watched the old lion walk out of the room. For the first time in his life, Gavin Reed didn't feel like a shark in a suit. He felt like a lawyer. And as he looked at the file in his hands, he realized that the hardest case of his life was about to begin. The case of defending his own soul. The cage. The irony of prison was not lost on Lawrence Sterling, though he wished it were. He sat on the edge of a thin, lumpy mattress in cell block D, staring at the concrete wall. The paint was peeling in shapes that looked like mocking faces. In here, he wasn't Your Honor. He wasn't Judge Sterling. He was inmate 9422. But the guards, men whose unions he had often ruled against in pension disputes, had a different name for him. They called him the Gavel. It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder of the instrument he no longer held. The noise was constant. It was a cacophony of shouting, metal clanging on metal, and the endless drone of a television in the common area encased in plexiglass. But the worst part wasn't the noise. It was the language. Sterling found himself trapped in a world where he couldn't understand the dialect. The inmates spoke in a rapid-fire slang, a mix of street code and prison jargon that sounded alien to his ears. When he asked them to enunciate, to speak proper English, they didn't cower like the defendants in Courtroom 4B. They laughed. They bumped his shoulder in the chow line. They knocked his tray over. "Watch where you step, Gavel," a large man with tattoos covering his neck sneered one morning. I beg your pardon," Sterling stammered, his instincts as a judge kicking in. "You will address me with respect." The man laughed, a sound that echoed the cruel laughter Sterling had once directed at Tobias King. "Respect? You're in the pit now, old man. You ain't got no robe to hide behind." The hard karma. Tobias King had promised was systematic. Sterling tried to file an appeal regarding his sentence. He knew the law. He knew he had grounds to argue procedural error. But to file an appeal, he needed access to the law library. "Request denied," the prison warden said, tossing Sterling's perfectly handwritten form into the trash. "On what grounds?" Sterling demanded, his hands shaking. "The statutes clearly state that every inmate has the right to legal resources." The warden smiled. It was a cold, bureaucratic smile. "The library is closed for renovations. Inmate 9-222. Indefinitely. Besides, you filled out the wrong form. This is Form 10A. You needed Form 10B. It's a blue sheet. We're out of blue sheets." Sterling stared at him. That's absurd. That's a technicality designed to obstruct justice." "Is it?" the warden asked, raising an eyebrow. "Funny. I read your case history, Sterling. You dismissed 300 appeals in your career based on filing errors. You sent men to this very prison because they used the wrong ink color on a motion. Now you want mercy for a missing blue sheet?" The warden leaned in close. "Welcome to the system you built." Sterling walked back to his cell, defeated. He realized then that the law wasn't a shield. It was a weapon. And for 30 years he had been holding it by the handle. Now he was staring down the barrel. The letter 6 months into his sentence, Sterling was desperate. His assets had been frozen by the lawsuits. His wife had divorced him, taking what was left. He had no money for a private attorney. The public defender assigned to his appeal was overworked and, frankly, hated him. He needed a miracle. He needed a lawyer who was brilliant, fearless, and willing to work for free. He sat at the small metal table in his cell and uncapped a cheap ballpoint pen. He stared at the blank paper for an hour. His pride fought a war against his survival instinct. Finally, survival won. He wrote the letter. To the director of the King Legal Aid Center, I write to you as a man with nothing left. I am currently incarcerated at State Correctional, and I am being denied my basic constitutional rights to prepare a defense. The irony of my request is not lost on me. I know who you are. I know who founded your center. But I also know that Tobias King claimed to stand for justice for the forgotten man. I am now the forgotten man. I have no money. I have no voice. The system is crushing me. If your mission is truly to help those who cannot help themselves, I beg you to take my case. Sincerely, Lawrence Sterling. He folded the letter. His hand trembled as he slid it into the envelope. Addressing it to 42 Oak Street felt like signing a confession. He handed it to the guard during mail call, feeling a piece of his soul wither away. The sanctuary. The renovation of 42 Oak Street was nothing short of a resurrection. The rotting wood had been replaced with warm, polished cedar. The windows, once boarded up, were now floor-to-ceiling glass that let the sunlight pour in. The sign out front didn't look like a corporate law firm plaque. It was carved from simple stone. The Elias King Center for Justice. Inside, there were no marble floors that echoed with intimidation. There was carpet, there were comfortable chairs, there was a play area for children whose parents were discussing eviction notices or unfair dismissals. Gavin Reed sat in the director's office. He looked different. The expensive gelled haircut was gone, replaced by a simple, messy style. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no tie. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. He was reviewing a case file for a single mother who was being sued by a predatory lender. The work was endless. The pay was a fraction of what he had made as a prosecutor. But for the first time in his life, Gavin slept soundly at night. "Gavin," Sarah O'Connell said, knocking on the open door frame. Sarah, the interpreter who had exposed Sterling, now volunteered at the center 3 days a week. She handled intake for non-English speakers, ensuring that no one was ever laughed at for their accent again. "Mail call," Sarah said, dropping a stack of envelopes on his desk. "Mostly bills. But there's one here from... well, you should just look." Gavin picked up the envelope with the prison stamp. State Correctional Facility. He recognized the handwriting immediately. The sharp, angular script of Lawrence Sterling. Gavin opened it. He read the plea. He read the desperation. He sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. A year ago, he would have shredded it. A year ago, he would have laughed. "He wants us to represent him," Gavin said quietly. Sarah sat down opposite him. "You're kidding? After everything?" "He says his rights are being violated. He says he's being denied access to the law library." "And he probably is," Sarah said, her voice hard. "But why should we care? He created that environment. Let him rot in it." Gavin looked at the letter. "Tobias says that justice isn't about who the person is. It's about what the law is. If we let the prison abuse him, we're saying the system is allowed to be abusive." "So you want to help him?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "No," Gavin said. "I want to deny him. I want to burn this letter. But I don't know what Tobias would do." "Then ask him," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Tobias King stood there. He was leaning on his cane again, Not because he was weak, but because he was tired. He had spent the morning in federal court, arguing a class action suit for immigrant workers. Tobias walked in and took the letter from Gavin. He read it in silence. His face was unreadable. "What do we do, sir?" Gavin asked. "If we take the case, the community will hate us. They'll say we're helping the villain." Tobias placed the letter on the desk. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "There is a difference, Gavin, between the right to a defense and the privilege of our service," Tobias said softly. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. He could see the spot on the sidewalk where the police had dragged Sterling away. "Lawrence Sterling is experiencing the world he created," Tobias said. "To intervene now, to use our resources to pull him out of the fire he lit, would be to rob him of his education. He is finally learning, Gavin. For the first time in 60 years, he is learning what it feels like to be powerless." Tobias turned back to them. "Write him back," Tobias commanded. "What do I say?" Gavin asked, pen hovering over a pad. "Tell him that we acknowledge his request," Tobias said. "Tell him that we agree his rights are likely being violated, as they are for thousands of inmates," he sentenced. "Enclose a copy of the Pro Se Legal Handbook, the one we give to our indigent clients who cannot find representation. Tell him that if he wishes to fight the system, he must do it as a common man. With no favors, with no shortcuts, with just his voice and the truth." Tobias paused, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "And Gavin? Sign it." From the desk of the interpreter. The legacy 5 years later. The Elias King Center was no longer just a local office. It was a beacon. It had expanded to 3 other cities. It was the day of the annual gala. But it wasn't held in a hotel ballroom. It was held in the street, right in front of 42 Oak Street. Tents were set up. Music was playing. Jazz, salsa, Afro beats. The air smelled of barbecue and fried plantains. Gavin Reed stood on the makeshift stage. He was older now, graying at the temples. He was the executive director of the entire network. "Thank you all for coming," Gavin spoke into the microphone. The crowd cheered. "We have a special guest today, the man who started it all, the man who taught me that the loudest voice in the room is usually the one with the least to say." Tobias King walked onto the stage. The applause was deafening. He was over 70 now, his movement slower, but his presence was undiminished. He adjusted the microphone. "My father," Tobias began, his voice raspy but clear, "Elias King, came to this country with $5 and a dream. He spoke 5 languages, but because he didn't speak English perfectly, he was told he was worth nothing. He spent his life cleaning the floors of the courthouse, where I eventually practiced law." Tobias looked out at the crowd. He saw Sarah O'Connell in the front row, holding her newborn daughter. He saw the faces of the people they had saved. Families kept together, workers paid their wages, innocent men freed from prison. "I built this place," Tobias continued, "not to destroy men like Lawrence Sterling. I built it to ensure that men like Elias King are never destroyed again. We do not fight for victory. We fight for dignity. Because an accent is not a sign of stupidity. It is a sign of bravery. It is a sign that someone has crossed a border, left a home, and started anew to build a life. And that is something we should never laugh at. That is something we should bow to." Tobias lifted his cane in the air. "To Elias! To Elias!" The crowd roared back. Deep in the bowels of the state prison, an old man sat in the corner of the newly reopened law library. Lawrence Sterling was gaunt. His hair was white and thin. He wore cheap reading glasses taped at the bridge. He was hunched over a battered legal textbook, but he wasn't working on his own case. Next to him sat a young, terrified boy, barely 18, who had been arrested for a crime he didn't understand. The boy spoke broken English, terrified and confusing his words. I no do it, the boy whispered. I know, how say, intent. Sterling didn't snap. He didn't check his watch. He didn't laugh. He looked at the boy with eyes that had seen the bottom of the well. Take your time, Sterling said, his voice raspy but patient. I am listening. We will find the right words together. Sterling tapped his finger on the page, finding the precedent. He wasn't a judge anymore. He would never be a lawyer again. But in the silence of the prison library, helping a boy who couldn't speak the language, Lawrence Sterling was finally doing the one thing he had never done in Courtroom 4B. He was serving justice, and that is the story of how one man's arrogance became his undoing, and how a moment of cruelty birthed a legacy of justice. Judge Sterling thought he was mocking a fool, but he was mocking a master. He learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a man by his accent. In the end, even the judge had to learn humility from the very people he despised. It's a powerful reminder that true intelligence isn't about how you speak. It's about what you say and how you treat others. Tobias King turned his pain into power, and in doing so, he even managed to save the soul of the man who tried to destroy him. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps get these stories out to more people. And if you believe in karma and justice, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I post new stories of drama, revenge, and redemption every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. What do you think? Did Judge Sterling deserve a harsher punishment, or was working in the prison library the perfect redemption? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.